And at this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening. He's also a personal friend of mine. Ernesto Herrera is a wildlife biologist who was born and raised here in the Rio Grande Valley. He received his Master of Science in Biology at UTRGV, where he researched pollinator syndromes and distribution. He has a great knowledge of native plants, which he shares with others, and he spends his free time collecting native plants and seeds, which he then propagates. He is also an animal lover, and he enjoys caring for his many pets. At this time, let us welcome Ernesto Herrera.
You're trying to speak without it. Do you mean loud without it, or need the mic? Sorry, I'm really bad with the mic. That's right. But all right, guys. Well, so today's presentation is going to be a bit about most of it is going to be on the different native bees that we have in the Rio Grande Valley, and then I'll go a little bit over about their conservation, just ways so we can help at home, and just kind of get more bees at your place or wherever it is that you're trying to attract them to. A little bit about this presentation as well. This isn't about honeybees at all. You're going to see me kind of going away from honeybees for the most part. And the main reason is just that these, that's the main, part that I'm trying to spread the awareness about is that native bees are what are really important here, unless you're, trying to produce honey. Other than that, we can do everything else with native bees. So as you can see here, this is a picture from the Museum of Earth. This is like just a good example of kind of the diversity of bees that we have, right? These are just very few, but they come in all sorts of colors. They come in all sorts of sizes. They have, different body parts that just like, and some of them are more pronounced. Some have more hair, like this one at the bottom left. Some have much longer antenna. They have the pollen collecting parts, which are the scopa, are just in different places of their body, right? So as we go through the presentation, just kind of keep those things in mind, and I'll kind of mention them again, right? But this is just kind of a good example of just like the type of bees that you'll find, in your yard if you start attracting more and more bees to your place. All right, so some of the main things about native bees is that they're mainly solitary. When we think of bees, the European honeybee that we think of all the time, you see them in hives, right? They're always known to be in hives, either in the ground, in a tree, in a cavity somewhere. Most of our native bees are solitary. That means the female kind of works the whole time on her own. She goes and collects pollen, and she lays eggs in these small, what are her nests, basically, right? The only real social bees that we have besides those are bumblebees. And so we have one species of bumblebee in the Rio Grande Valley. Other than that, pretty much every other bee here is solitary. And some of them are what we call primitively eusocial, which means they kind of nest in congregations, but still every bee is working on their own nest for the most part, right? Some of them have a single entrance, where many bees will kind of separate and then they'll each take care of their own nest, but still we still consider them solitary for the most part. The males are pretty much around just to mate, and that's it. But you will see them about the same proportion as you see the bees, as you see the females, as opposed to honeybees, where it's mostly all females, and then the males come in just in time for these mating flights. There's a wide range of species. We have over 200 species that are documented in the Rio Grande Valley, and they all have different types of foraging behaviors, nesting behaviors. They will eat different parts of your plants, and and it just kind of just spreads out from there. So there's a ton of variety, and like I said, I'll continue going over that as we go over the different bees. Their pollination services, research actually shows that they are better than the European honeybees at pollinating our crops and our native plants. And so one of the main things we need to do if we do have, say, we're trying to grow our food, right? We're trying to grow all sorts of crops. One of the main things we want to do is keep native plants around. That'll help these bees supplement their diet and help them get enough pollen for their nests, right? That's the main thing they're trying to do. They're trying to just reproduce. So if we have enough pollen around for them, if we have enough nectar, you'll be able to get more and more bees, right? And they'll also go to your crops and they'll pollinate your crops. There's no real need to have a honeybee hive around to pollinate your crops. And so if you see a lot of times the Save the Bees campaign, you'll always see a honeybee on there, right? But in reality, I mean, I think we should focus more on our native bees here. We can take care, like I said, of all the pollination services that we need. They can still be taken care of completely if we just, care for our native bees. So this is a good example of one of our bees here. This is Deodacia, which is a chimney bee. It's a cactus specialist, so it's mostly found around the springtime, summer. That's when they come out the most. They'll be, pollinating all your cacti. They're a relatively big bee, and they're pretty hairy, as you can see this one. But they're gorgeous, and like I said, once you start noticing them, you'll start seeing all the differences in all these bees. So this is an example of their life cycle. If you start off at the egg, it's way down there. So the bee will go ahead and lay an egg, and with it, that big orange thing is basically a sack of pollen. So she puts a bunch of pollen together with the saliva, and she places it in there with the egg. You can't really even see the egg in that first picture. The reason for that is that when the egg is born, it's a larva, right? It's just basically a juvenile insect, and it'll feed on that pollen sac that whole time. And that's its entire, I guess, diet, until it grows to the right size to metamorphose into a pupa, and then it'll come out of its nest as an adult. After that, the adults will go around foraging for pollen, and they'll get nectar, right? They'll be pollinating our crops, pollinating our plants, and the females will work on nest building. They'll, for the most part, be in cavities. Some of them make their own cavities. Some other ones use cavities of other insects. It just depends, right? And in there, they'll store, again, the eggs, and they'll store pollen for each and every one of these eggs. Each one will have their own chamber with a sack of pollen, and they pretty much lay them out in a row. And so, yeah, this is the typical life cycle of insects, of native bees, of solitary bees. They will, for the most part, this is like a 1 year thing. So they'll be born, as soon as it gets warm, and they'll go through the whole life cycle, and then they'll overwinter as eggs, basically. So most of our bees just kind of die back, in the wintertime when it gets too cold, and their life cycle continues, during their egg phase. And they're typically kind of stored away, low, pretty low underground, or like I said, in tree trunks or stuff like that. So that kind of helps insulate them during the wintertime, and that's how they survive. But for the most part, this is just a 1 year cycle, and that's as much as it goes. If we have a warm winter, then yeah, they'll keep going, right? But other than that, that's pretty much it. If their food runs out, right? We have a lot of seasonal plants. Like I said, cacti. Cacti bloom at a certain time. After that, bees that specialize on cacti will be gone after that, because they just don't have that that food that they typically get from. So I'm going to start with the different bees that we have here. We have 5 major families in the Rio Grande Valley. We have Andrenidae, which are mining bees. These are just the common names, are kind of generic names for them. There's a lot of them that they'll call mining bees within that. But for the most part, these guys are digging their nests in the ground, which all of them do for the most part. Apidae are long-tongued bees. These guys, when they die, you'll notice their tongue muscles kind of relax, and their tongue will stick out, and it's relatively long compared to the other bee families. We have Coletidae, which are polyester bees. These guys, the main thing that they do that's different is that they, within their cells, where they lay their eggs, they produce a kind of polyester sort of substance, right? And that lines their nests. And so they're very different in that sense. Halictidae, these guys, we call them sweat bees, because typically whenever you're sweating, they're attracted to kind of the salts within your sweat, so you'll kind of see them on you for that reason. they tend to be pretty small. And we have Megachilidae, which are leafcutter bees. Just like leafcutter ants, these guys are bees, but they don't grow, a fungus that they then eat. They use the leaves as well to line their nests as well. So pretty much all of them do the same thing, but they line their nests differently as well, right? So these guys with leaves, sweat bees would typically use kind of a mixture of like soil and just kind of make a sort of mud, right? The polyester bees, so they produce their own kind of cellophane substance. Long-tongue bees will also use kind of a mud substance, and mining bees as well. And then there's more specific ones, and I'll get into on that. Here's an example of Bombus pennsylvanicus, which is our native bumblebee. It's not extremely common, but you will see them around. If you have enough flowers, they'll come. But it's one of those bees that I figured was going to be a lot more common just because they're so well known. But here in the Rio Grande Valley, they're not doing too well, and they're actually also a species that's listed for that's being proposed to get listed as I don't know if it's going to be threatened or endangered, but they want to protect it basically, right? And so once that comes in, if they do get protected, well then that becomes a whole regulatory issue where you have to do mitigation for everything basically. So it'll get interesting. We'll see. This is an example of a sweat bee. This is Agaposoma texanus. And so it's a tiny little bee. It's green. You'll find them on sunflowers for the most part. We have Svastra. That's one of the polyester bees, Caletidae. And that's one of the Andrinas, the mining bees up here. So females all have stingers. Every single female will have a stinger. Males do not. The reason they can sting is, and good question by the way. I'm sorry, who asked it? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so basically females all have a stinger. The main reason they evolved that was actually it's kind of a secondary evolutionary, I guess, trait. The main reason they have that is that it's actually, that's how they lay their eggs, right? It's an ovipositor. So they kind of stick their ovipositor wherever they need to, and they'll lay an egg. And a secondary trait of it is that it's also a stinger, right? So it wasn't meant to be a stinger, but it just kind of works out that way, and they can use them both, right? So yeah, the females can sting. I've been stung by some of them. It doesn't hurt anywhere near as much as honeybees, but I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. And the males also, since they don't have stingers, sometimes they'll especially the carpenter bees, they'll just bump at you and they'll kind of hit you. And that's all they can do. They can't really do anything else but attack you with their massive bodies, right? So we're going to start going into some of the genera, which is the genus of these different bees, right? This is a good example of the different sizes we can get. So that black head is a carpenter bee, the big black ones that I'm sure everyone is familiar with. They're all over the place, right? That's the head of one, and that small one is a perdita. So it's smaller than its eye. We call them fairy bees as well. They're very, very, very small, and there's tons of them. That's a group that a lot of people don't like getting into just because they're so difficult to identify. And like I said, it's just one of those where it's just like, okay, well, all of these are perdita, and we'll just leave it at that. It's one of those nightmares, so you don't want to get into there. They are ground nesting, and they like fine clay-like soil, so with bare ground, interestingly enough. So even bare ground can be important whenever you're trying to attract bees. And they like kind of that silty clay-like soil, right, so that they can kind of start packing it all together, and they pack their walls really nicely in there. This is an example of one of those that has pre-social behavior, whereas they nest in aggregations, right? They're all nests together. They don't necessarily use the same nests, but all the females do nest in kind of the same area. So you'll see a whole patch and you'll see lots of little holes. Those are typically bees, and most of them are these mining bees. Here we have Andrina, another group that's ground nesting. A good example here is, this is kind of how they will nest. This is a single female, and what she does is she has one entrance, and then she makes separate tunnels for each of her nests. not all of the bees nest this way. Most of them is just in a line that they put all their eggs, right? But this one's interesting because she'll kind of make these different tunnels into each single nest, and then she'll have a single entrance. That's all a single female. These females can go pretty far down, more than 2-3 feet, and they'll have their eggs way down there. If this is a tiny, tiny bee you're thinking about, I mean, 2 to 3 feet is a lot, right? This is what the typical entrance will look like. And you have a species over there that's, pollinating. I'm not sure if that's Onitera. I can't tell what that flower is. But anyway, they do prefer sandier soils near or under shrubs. And they forage mainly on plants in the Asteraceae family. And asters are sunflowers, for those who aren't sure.
How often would you say that you stumble on your little nests? Like how often would you say you see them in the valley?
You can have them in your garden. You just need to look really, really, really closely. And yeah, I mean like, less than half an inch. I mean, less than half a centimeter. Actually, they're tiny. The perdidas, especially, a lot of our bees, the sweat bees are really small as well. Some of these are bigger, like bombus, that's bigger than a honeybee, so you should be able to see those. But yeah, they basically, you have to follow them and look where they're at. They're not going too far. They're usually around the plants that they're foraging around, and if you follow them enough, you should be able to find where their nests are at.
Is there like an ant that makes like a similar looking, like a hole kind of like a face, but there's a little bit of a tower, right? So it's not bad.
No. Yeah, and you'll see kind of differences. You won't. I mean, the leafcutter ants, you'll see them coming in and out all the time. These guys are, you'll only see one bee coming in and out every once in a while, right? Sorry. That's an Andrenidae, so yeah. Yeah. All right, so we're here. Move to the next family over, Apidae. These are the long-tongued bees. Like I mentioned, these have their tongues can be about, I think, twice as much as their body length, or 1.5, somewhere there. There's one species found in the Rio Grande Valley, the American bumblebee, and it's considered, well, I guess I already have it here threatened in the U.S., but it's proposed threatened in the U.S., and it's the only native bee that's eusocial, or that actually has a whole kind of social lifestyle where they all help each other with a single nest. They all take care of the young. They have a single queen, right? They have about a few hundred individuals within that nest, so nowhere near as massive as honeybee nests that can get to the thousands, even more than that. And they're generalists. They love sunflowers. You'll find them in all sorts of the plants in the sunflower family. So I always say, if you want to start attracting bees, start with the sunflowers, right? Start just planting tons of sunflowers. You'll do really well from there. And they're really important pollinators for crops like tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers because they're buzz pollinators. So these plants in the Solanaceae family, which are where the tomatoes and eggplants and peppers are at, they require specific vibrations for their pollen to release and to land on the stigmas, right? So these bees are some of those bees that'll do that. They'll land on the flower, they'll buzz at a certain frequency, and then the pollen gets released for them to be able to pollinate those crops. Without that sort of bee, you can't really do it much. For those of you who grow tomatoes, maybe you've heard before, I don't know if you've heard this, but you can shake the flowers a bit every day or so, and it helps increase your yield. I've heard of people, I don't know if you've heard this, Stephanie, but people use like the toothbrushes that like vibrate. They try doing that too. I haven't tried that, but another way you can do it is just try to attract these bees, and you won't be there having kind of hand pollinating every single, tomato flower, right? But yeah, so that's kind of naturally how they evolved, and that's this relationship that they have with the Solanaceae plants. Here we have the carpenter bees. This is the one that a lot of people are familiar with. I don't know how to get rid of them. Before anyone asks, everyone asks me that one. I have no idea how to get rid of them, but they're really not that bad. They won't They tend to go for wood that's already rotting. So if you want to, if you're thinking about why they're going for your house, maybe that's the reason why. But there's about 4 species. There's 4 species found in the Rio Grande Valley. Every once in a while, you find another vagrant here and there. The biggest one being Xylocopa griswoldii now, which is a Mexican carpenter bee, and it's huge, right? And then you get like 3 others that are a bit smaller. They nest in rotting wood. That's specifically what they like, or plants with thick, hollow stems. They tend to be nectar robbers, which is pretty interesting. If you see them if anyone has Turk's cap, for example, or red sage, you'll see them, they don't go into the flower. They go right at the base of the flower, they create a slit, and then they suck the nectar out of there. So they don't pollinate the flower for that same reason. And so they typically consider them nectar robbers. And another important buzz pollinator does the same thing as the bumblebee. We also have Seratina within the carpenter bees. These are much smaller than Xylocopa. This is a good example right here. They tend to nest within hollow stems of plants as well. And they're, again, not considered pests. They're not going to go, destroy your house or anything. And they really like this animal vine, which is one of our native morning glories that if you let it go, it'll kind of take over a whole fence. But it has this beautiful white flower with that purple center. This is one of the few flowers that this bee will go to. And it kind of just gives you a reason why you should be planting more diversity in your gardens, right? If you don't have that plant, you won't really see this bee at all. Right? Here we're going into chimney bees. Recently, these Diodacia got a little bit famous. I guess someone got a picture of 2 of them kind of sleeping together in a poppy flower. They do tend to do that. Why? And it's mostly males that do that. They don't have, the females sleep in their nests. They have wherever they're laying their eggs, they'll just go in there and they'll sleep. The males don't have their nests because they don't really do anything else. So they just go sleep together in flowers. And if you go very early in the morning to cactus flowers or the prickly poppy flowers, and you kind of open the flowers, you tend to find them in there. And those are all males. So it's pretty cool. You can get really cool pictures like this one up here. And yeah, they're very important pollinators of our cacti out here. These are cactus specialists. They go, any cacti that are blooming out here, they'll typically go for those, and you'll see tons of them on there. They're ground nesting as well, and these do have raised mounds, which is why they're called chimney bees. And then we have another group of chimney bees in a different genus, which is Melitoma. They do the same kind of behavior where they have these raised mounds. These are a little bit more of specialists where they go specifically to Alamo Vine and Esperanza here in the Rio Grande Valley. Few others, I haven't documented any yet. I don't think Paula has yet. Paula, by the way, is the person who takes these beautiful pictures. She gave me permission to use her pictures. A few of these are mine. Most of them are hers, and I'll share her website after this as well. But yeah, we have tried documenting, the different flowers that they're going to, and some of these you can see they're very specific to just a few plants, and that's it. This is an example of what chimney bee nests look like, and this is an example of an aggregation, right? You'll find them all kind of sorted together, but each one of those is a separate female that's laying her eggs within it. And yeah, the males will also kind of hang out here because they know the females are coming in, so they'll ambush them like as soon as they're usually early in the morning as the females are coming out, the males are already there and they'll go right after them. And that's just a thing they do. But yeah, so these are really interesting. All these bees, like I said, they're all digging their own tunnels. They're all kind of creating these chimneys, right? These nests. And so it just shows like how much energy they spend, right? To just lay a few eggs pretty much in their life cycle. They won't be laying 100 eggs. That's way too much. I don't know honestly how many they would be laying, but probably a few dozen at the most. So yeah, just a good example. These guys like very like loose sandy soils. For those of you that live out in like the sand sheet, red sand sheet area especially, you'll find these regularly. But they're everywhere. I mean, there's cacti down here as well, and you can still find these bees. So they're somewhere. You just need to look for them.
Is that typical for the amount of bees altogether, or is it something a little less normal? Would you normally see this many chimneys next to each other?
Not necessarily. I think it just comes down to like how much disturbed soil there is, or like open ground, right? You won't really find it, down here or like in more disturbed areas within the urban kind of habitats. You won't find them like this. Typically, I've seen this outside of the city where people have like just natural habitats, and where they have their trails, right? They'll be right along the trails. But yeah, I haven't seen them at least within urban habitats at least. So. All right, so we have some more digger bees here. Again, we're still within the long-tongue bee group. You can see that bee sticking out its tongue, and it's like going way into the base of the flower. So it's a pretty long tongue. These guys are, again, digger bees. They nest in the ground, in hollow stems, rotting wood. So we're starting to see a pattern here, right? They're found on shrubby blue sage, guayacan, silverleaf nightshade, and duranta. Then we have centrists, which this is one of my favorite groups. These are the oil digger bees. And specifically, they like to collect oils from some of the plants that they go to. One of the plants that they love is Barbados cherry. If you have one blooming, you'll find these for sure. It's like, I don't know how they get to it, but they go to it immediately. And so what they do with that oil is they line their nests with them. And so I don't know if it's a way to preserve their nest, or if it's a way to keep pests out, repel pests. I'm not really sure what that does, but it's something very special to these bees, and that's you won't really find it in other groups of bees. They also like Esperanza, Crucita, Duranta, and Snout Bean, but Barbados cherry, that's the one. That's a good one. And here we have 5 other genera that we group together as the longhorn bees. And you'll see why. The males have very long antennae. That's only the males that have those antennae that are that size. We have the 5 genera that I mentioned: Melisodes, Melisopteris, Vastra, Florilegus, and Eucera. Again, primarily ground nesters, and they prefer plants in Asteraceae, Fabaceae, Cactaceae. And like I mentioned earlier, with the chimney bees, these also tend to sleep in aggregations. You'll find them sometimes at the tip of branches. You'll find just a whole group of bees. I found them once when we were doing the night hikes at the nature center. There was just a whole group of them, and I kind of got scared, but I didn't know anything about bees back then. But yeah, they're just, the males have to find a place to sleep, and it usually is a lot safer for them to, sleep together, right? So yeah, that's kind of why they do that. You'll notice they're all very different. A lot of these males, especially in these groups, have that, what we call a clypeus, is that yellow, I guess, scale. I don't know what you call that, yellow part between their eyes. The males will tend to have that, the females don't. So that's a good way to kind of identify between the two if you can't see already that their antennae are pretty long. Here's a picture of what I mentioned earlier. The males just kind of hanging out. Those are different bee. The females have their cavities, right? And this is a male just kind of hanging out at the entrance, waiting to just ambush a female that comes out, right? And he'll mate with her real quick in flight, and then try to go and move on to the next one. And that's kind of how they go about it. So yeah, and you'll see them also like bump each other. They'll fight for the space as well. So you'll see males chasing each other, bumping each other away. That's their space, and they try to be very territorial of it. Moving on to Caletidae. These are the polyester bees that I mentioned earlier. Calides is the only genera that we know of here in the only genus that we know of here in the Rio Grande Valley. These are the cellophane bees. You can see this one's pollinating quincula, which is a purple ground cherry. Their name comes from, again, the secretion that they use to line their nests. I'll have a picture of it in the next slide. They're ground nesters. They line their nests are in a line, so they'll lay one egg and then another one, right? And they're all straight out, close to the entrance, right? And they also will find them on asters, but mostly in the Solanaceae plants. So if you look here, this is another Callididae species, but this is the substance that they produce. Like I said, it looks like kind of that polyester sort of substance, right? And you'll see how they line their nests with it, right? So that's the oldest egg, and it moves on to the newest one, and they'll just keep lining it all the way out, right? That's very specific to them. These guys also, I forgot to mention this earlier, but these guys carry their pollen internally. So they have a specific body organ where they carry all their pollen in, and then they use that to create the pollen sacs and then the cellophane. A lot of the past bees that I was showing, they carry their pollen on their back legs. And again, only females carry pollen. Males have no reason to carry pollen at all because they do nothing with the nesting behaviors at all. So only females. If you see any bees with pollen on their legs or their abdomen, it's a female, right? This is a group of bees called the mast bees, Hylaeus. These are interesting because they also nest in old beetle burrows or even cells in wasp nests, like the wasps that will be like on the hinges of your houses or wherever. You'll find these bees will nest in there as well. So they're looking for any sort of little holes that they can fit in, and they'll go in there. They carry their pollen internally, and you tend to see them on Texas palafox and crotons here in the Rio Grande Valley. So really cool looking bee. These are the nice bright green ones you'll find on your asters. These are tiny sweat bees. They're pretty small. This whole group is small. Ground nesters, but they're extremely important pollinators for all sorts of things. I mean, legumes, squash, watermelons, all the Solanaceae plants, strawberries. And as you can see, I mean, as small as they are, this is a group that's a little more abundant. You'll see them all over the place. There's two genera, Algochloropsis here and Algochlora. There's also Agapastamon, and there's several others. By the way, I'm not mentioning every single genus because there's way too many and we'd be here till midnight. So this is just kind of some of the main groups that you'll see out here, but there's tons more. These Algochlora, which is the one down here, they can be primitively eusocial. Again, they just kind of nest in aggregations, but they're not entirely social in that they don't care for any other females' eggs or anything. They only care for their own, and that's it. But they nest nearby. You'll find these on Alamo vine, prickly pear, esperanza, cowpen daisy, goldenrod. So notice there again, that's a good group of those are mostly asters. So just keep thinking about the different plants that we're putting in for these bees. Here are two other sweat bees, Algochlorella and Agapastamon. Algochlorella is down here, Agapastamon is at the top. Again, you'll find the Agapastamon on scorpion tail and tons of the asters again. And, the other way. Find Agapastamon on asters and Verbenaceae plants. And then the Algochlorella is typically on scorpion tail. That's a very common bee you'll find there. This one's really, really small, by the way. This is a lot bigger. You can typically see it easily. This one gets tiny. Continuing with the sweat bees, this is a ligated furrow bee up here. And they nest in loose soils. Same thing again. They are generalists. You'll find them in a whole group of plants, asters, Solanaceae, Verbenaceae, milkweeds, mints, mallows, right? You'll find them in all sorts of plants. And so that's a good generalist. You don't really need a plant for it. Typically, if you put one of the plants out there, you'll get this bee. as opposed to, and then we have Lasioglossum, which is another genus that has just tons of little brown bees. And they're extremely difficult to ID to the species level. So I just stay at the genus level for these. They nest in loose soils, and they like Asteraceae, the Convolvulus, Papaver, Cactaceae, and Malvaceae. And so this is another one in that animal vine that I mentioned earlier, right? The Morning Glory. All right, so I think this is the last group I have. These are the Megachilidae. These are really cool because these are the leafcutter bees. So these have very different behaviors than most of the other bees. To begin with, they carry their pollen under their abdomen. So you'll see that bee on the left. She has like lots of pollen kind of clumped up. I mean, lots of hairs clumped up at the bottom of her abdomen. That's where she packs all her pollen and carries it to the nests from. And so, like I said, that's a very specific region for them, and that's usually how you'll know you're in this family of bees. These guys nest in rotting wood, hollow stems in the ground. The main difference for these is that they cut leaves or petals, and that's how they line their nest. So each cell will be lined with different leaves or different petals. You'll see they won't defoliate your leaves like leafcutter ants. Like leafcutter ants will. These guys, you'll see a few leaves here and there that have a cut, right? So they're pretty cool in that sense. They will be found in Fabaceae, so things like ebonies, mesquite, whitebrush, skeleton leaf, goldeneye, Texas thistle, and shrubby blue sage. This is another cool one in Megachilidae. I like pointing this one out. This is a Liturgopsis. This is a huge black bee that you'll find mostly when the cacti are blooming. But unlike most of the other cactus bees, this one's in Megachilidae in the leafcutters. This one's one of the ones that's, if you leave like your shovel out there, or something that has a wooden handle, they will make holes into it. And so they have huge jaws. You can't really see them in this picture for some reason. I guess it's the angle it's on. But their jaws are enormous, and they're mostly found on prickly pear cactus and prickly poppies. Once those plants are done blooming, you won't see this bee anymore. There's another interesting one in the leafcutter bees. This is Osmia, and it's a mason bee. So this one will create its own sort of, basically a substance, right? Where, like what we do when we create cement, right? But they use leaves, resin, mud, and even pebbles to do it. And that's how they line their nests with that. One of the main things that they do here in the Rio Grande Valley is that they get these little buds, or I'm not sure what that's called, but it's that little leaf part on cacti that's found right by the spines. They'll get that and they'll chew it, and then they'll go into their nest and they'll mix that with mud or soil, and that's how they'll line their leaves. So it's a really, really interesting bee. You'll find it if you look at prickly pear pads. You'll find it right on the tips of the new growth. That's typically where they're at. They nest in rotting wood, also old beetle tunnels, wasp nest cells, and even old snail shells. So that's another interesting one here. They're generalists on flowers, but they specifically get the sticky substance that's within cacti in order to line their nests. So really cool. There's a whole group of mason bees that also do this sort of thing, but they don't use cacti. They'll just use soil and saliva for the most part. So yeah, I thought this one was nice. It has this dark green color too, which makes it look great. All right, so for all these bees that I've mentioned earlier, we have what are called cuckoo bees. So you all know about the cuckoo bird, right? Everyone knows about that? So cuckoo birds, what they typically do is they'll go to another bird's nest, they'll lay their egg there, and depending on the species of the cuckoo bird, some will, kick out the original bird's eggs out. Some will just outcompete them once they're born. They'll grow faster and, they'll die from there. Some will kick them out once they're born. So it just, it completely depends, right? But we have cuckoo bees as well. These guys don't necessarily kick out the original bees that are there. But what they do outcompete the bees within their nest. So basically what they do is they'll go to their host, which is any of these groups of bees, right? The cellophane bees, the longhorn bees, leafcutter sweat bees, andrena or oil digger bees. And when the female gets out, the female of a cuckoo bee will go in and she'll stick her ovipositor into the cell and she'll lay her egg in there. That bee that's born from that egg then will outcompete whatever other bee's egg was already originally in that cell. And so these guys do that, and it's pretty cool behavior. It's pretty cool how it's evolved here, then it's evolved in other groups, right? And so they all have their specific cuckoos, I guess you could say, right? So cellophane bees have the ones that create that polyester. They have Epiolis, which is up here. Longhorn bees and some of the other ground nesters in Apidae have Tripiolis, which is right there. Leafcutter bees have Coleoxys, which is this cool looking one here. You'll find it a lot on whitebrush for some reason. I guess maybe that's where the leafcutter bees are at. Sweat bees have Sphicodes, which is this one with the red abdomen. Andrena will have Nomada. And then this is a new bee that I just found a couple of months ago with Ken when we were out looking for this plant. This is an oil digger cuckoo bee, and I've never seen a bee like that kind of just black and white patterning. And sure enough, there are tons of oil digger bees, and there was an oil digger cuckoo bee as well, right? So yeah, they have their specific groups that they host on, and they're pretty good at that. And these males and females don't have to do anything. Most of the other ones, it's just males that don't really do anything. Females do all the work. Here, the females just kind of hang out, at their host nests, and they'll go and lay their eggs, and that's it. They don't have to collect pollen to feed their young because someone else already did it for them. So yeah, it's really interesting. You won't see them. They don't have any sort of pollen gathering, body parts. You just go around to these plants, collect nectar for food to feed themselves, and then they'll lay their eggs somewhere else. And the males are also just kind of hanging out somewhere, right, wherever they find the females too. So yeah, really cool different groups of bees, and I just figured I would put them all together here so y'all could see the diversity that we have for these.
When you say that they outcompete, other bees, how do they outcompete? Do they
Yeah, so it's typically for resources, right? So whatever they're out competing for, say it's water, something will finish up all the water and the rest of the animals can't, they die, right? Here, typically for these guys, that pollen sac that I mentioned at the very end that they lay in every single cell, these guys will just eat it a lot faster. Or they'll be born before, or they'll grow faster. They all have different mechanisms that they do it through, but that's pretty much how it happens. So basically, they'll just, the other one will starve and they'll die, right? And these guys will come out of that one nest. So, all right. So this is kind of the more important part to me. We can look at all these bees, we can learn all their names and, whatever, right? And you can get very specific or not specific if you want, right? But to me, this is kind of the main part of this whole conservation, this whole presentation, whatever it is, right? How do we help, right? Lots of people think, because we're at our homes that we can't help, we can't do anything, we have to have these massive, swaths of land, right, in order to help. Well, a lot of these bees really don't need a lot of space. They don't travel more than 1 kilometer at most from wherever their home range is at. So you can help a lot within a small space at your home, right? Whether you have a really small lawn, whether you just have container gardening, or you have a whole ranch, right? Whatever it is that you have, you can help. The way that I say to start with is plant asters. Plants those different types of plants that are within the sunflower family. These have these big kind of platforms. Many bees will be on one flower at a time sometimes, and they'll and a lot of bees will go to them. Different species will go to these sunflowers. So that's the best. I think that's the best way that you can start with. So things like common sunflower, these guys grow everywhere. You don't have to plant them; they'll just grow on their own. Cowpen daisy, Palafoxia, Crucita, which is about to bloom soon. Seaside goldenrod, Indian blankets, just anything you can think of that's in the sunflower family. Start with that. If you're planting for bees, this is a really good way to start. Then from there, you start supplementing with the other families. You plant in verbenas, right? You plant in the morning glories, cacti, whatever it is, right? You want to start adding them into your garden. And this will kind of help all these other specialist bees to come in as well. So you kind of just, you won't be able to get everything, but you will get a really good diversity just kind of using this strategy. Like I mentioned, asters to begin with, you really can't go wrong with those. You'll get, at least a good 20, 25 species on your asters alone. So that's a good place to go. Add a wildflower mix, right? Just, go in there, try add as many flowers as you can. Other things to really think about is having plants that bloom at different times of the year. You want to have plants that bloom in the spring, the summer, the fall, winter. I mean, if it's cold, it doesn't really matter too much for bees, but for other species it might. But you want to think about that, right? You want to have these different species that are blooming at all times. Why? Because some bees only come out in the spring, some bees only come out in the summer, some only in the fall. And if their food isn't there, then they won't make it, right? They won't be able to continue their life cycle and, carry on the next generation. So that's extremely important. So that's why things like I mentioned earlier, cacti, right? That's a plant that blooms, those plants bloom early in the season for the most part. And they're the ones that are supplementing these chimney bees, right? Or that Lizargopsis, that big leafcutter bee. Without those cacti, we wouldn't have those species of bees, right? So just, think about that whenever you're planting stuff. And if you've ever been to John's presentation, he did the phenology, right? And he kind of shows you all these different, groups of plants that bloom at different times of the year. So those are all good things to think about. Think of size and think of color of flowers as well. You want to have different colors. You want to have blues, pinks, purples, reds, yellows, whites. Bees are visual. They will go to any color basically, right? They're not as much scent oriented as some other animals that we have out here. Bees are very visual. So you want to have as many different colors, and different bees will go to those. And then size, right? Some of the bees, they can't pollinate some of the tiny flowers, right? So especially like carpenter bees, you'll see those guys going to the larger flowers for the most part. So think of those, you want to have as well different colors, different sizes. Buy from local native plant growers. I can't emphasize this enough. There's a list here, and I'm sure there's more up and coming, right? Local native plant growers will have usually stock that's grown from plants here in the Rio Grande Valley, so you're not going to be messing with the genetics of our plants. But also they won't use things like pesticides on their flowers, right? You won't have because these pesticides can also kill the pollinators, right? So I would stay away from Home Depot. Home Depot can have things like lantana, right? Or Lowe's and Walmart might have some plants that are native, right? But they do tend to use a lot of pesticides on their plants. So we don't want to plant those in our gardens. They have specifically usually like neonicotinoids, and that can kill our pollinators. So stay away from those. Try to find someone that's growing them locally, and then go from there. Or honestly, just let your garden go a little bit. Weed selectively. The natives will come in on their own. So that's this is a really good way to help there.
What is that first native plant nursery that you have in
Huizoche, that's Razi's.
At that club? Yeah.
What? No, that's Razi. Huizoche is in Razi. I've been tried it. Nasa Butterfly Center is in Mission. Razi's is in Edinburgh by Tres Lagos Valley Nature Center. Mike Keith is in Harlingen, and Oleander is in Mission. And if you all know other people here, plenty of us were willing to give you plants. So just talk to other ones here though. Another way to help, So these numbers, basically what they represent is for each of these bee genera, how many different plant species we found them on, right? So you'll see some of these like Apis mellifera is the European honeybee. You can see that's a generalist. It was found on 58 species of plants, right? And this is, and so you have Agochloropsis or Bombus, the American bumblebee. That was found on 11 plants, on 11 different species of plants, right? But then you see a lot of ones, right? So this is why it's very important to have a lot of diversity. Things like that one on Xylocellus that I mentioned, mostly you will find it on that Alamo vine, the Maramia dissecta, and that's it, right? So that's why it's very important to have different, a good diverse lawn, because some of these bees will only feed on that one plant, or for the most part, you only find them on that one plant. So I just was mentioning diversity. If you have a diverse lawn, you'll attract a diverse group of pollinators to it. So this is just something, to think about whenever you're planting your gardens. You also, in your garden, it's a good idea to have things like rotting logs, and plants with hollow stems. So whenever things like sunflowers die, right, you can leave them there, or if if it doesn't look bad, pile them out, to a side somewhere. Bees will use those. They love that like hollow stem. It's perfect for them to lay their egg. It's a perfect size for a lot of them, so that they can go in there and lay their eggs and continue their life cycle, right? Just rotting logs as well. If you look at them closely, you'll see tons of holes in them. Sometimes beetles make them, but then bees will use them the next year. So again, extremely important for that reason, right? People like bee hotels. That's something you can do. You can also help them by making your own holes on logs. If you have a relatively fresh log and it's taking a while to rot, you can go ahead and do that on your own as well. I will say with bee hotels, they do require some maintenance. The more we look into it, the more we see that some of the parasites on these bees will stick around within the bee hotels. So you do have to kind of clean them out yearly in the wintertime for the most part, or actually not in the wintertime. I guess in the spring. I don't know when I would do that, thinking about it. But they do require some maintenance. It's not one of those things that you can just leave there and, it'll do good. You might do more harm because the parasites will stay there and harm the next group of bees. So just something to kind of think about. Prevent the use of pesticides. Yeah, it's just, I will say that over and over if possible. You will kill your pollinators. No pesticide is specific to one thing. If you spray for mosquitoes, you're going to kill your bees, your butterflies, your flies, everything else, right? So.
So if you like how this picture has it, where they're like drilling holes into like a wood, if you do that, you don't have to maintain that, right?
No, so I wouldn't maintain that as much, right? Not something, and that also is eventually going to completely rot. Whereas these are usually more like treated wood, and you're kind of like, making these holes. And so, yeah, to me, this would be a smarter way. Or honestly, I mean, you could just leave the logs out there. Beetles will come in, they'll do their thing. Bees will take care of it afterwards, right? So, yeah, and you'll not only house bees there, you'll house tons of other things, right? So, yeah. Also, just educate yourself. Like there's Wild Bees, Texas is where I got most of the pictures from. That's Paula Sharp and Ross Eatman came down, and they took tons of pictures, and they've been trying to document all the bees in the Rio Grande Valley. She has over 200 species at this point. She has beautiful pictures. Every single picture pretty much in my presentation was from hers, with the exception of a few that were mine. And then Discover Life has a key. For those of you that like keying out things, you can go on there, and you can go and it'll tell you like the wing has to have this many cells, and this cell is supposed to be a specific shape, and all these crazy things that I just can't do it. But that's a good way to figure out what bee species you have as well. And that's it. All right. So, any questions? Yeah, they really will. It's So she was mentioning she lives in an apartment and she's asking if she can still have containers, like a small container, garden and attract bees. Yeah, like I said, you should stick to native plants for the most part if you want to attract those bees. And you can have tons of them. Honestly, they'll come if you put those native plants in there.
Do you know what bee it is that pollinates the Casibona cogita?
That typically is the Mexican feather tongue bee, the Tiloglossa mexicana. Yes, and it comes in like, yeah. Yeah, they're really cool, and they're the ones that, like, I would say specifically pollinate that plant because they're the right size. Their back kind of, rubs on those anthers and onto the stigma. Like they're the perfect size, and they usually you will find them on that one plant. So yeah.
If you're making a bee hotel, how do you know if the hole is good, like for the bee?
So you just make different sizes, right? There's different sizes of bees. So you would just make them all as many different sizes as possible, and they won't use every single hole. Some will use some of them, some won't. But that's just a good way to go about it. Make different sizes, and then you'll get some bees in there. So. How do you clean it? That's a good question. I am not sure yet. I've just been reading recently that's something to watch out for. Just an aggregation of parasites in those bee hotels. So there's these tiny mites specifically. Yes. So the varroa mites is a very it's like the one that's found in all sorts of honeybees, right? And that's the one that can really infest your honeybee. So there's different mites that are native as well that you can find on bees, right? Varroa mites can also apparently affect bumblebees, so kind of watch out for those. Yeah.
For cleaning the bee houses, usually people are talking about replacing all the wood and all the boards. So that's like you clean your bee house, you would just replace.
There you go. I guess that's the way to.
Especially, so you just get rid of the bamboo, cut the bamboo, put it in there. That's it.
Yes.
For the mating flights, the mating, does it typically occur at a specific time of year?
I'm sorry,
Does the mating typically occur at the specific time of year in the valley?
So it depends on the bee's life cycle, right? So whenever those females are coming out, that's when they'll do it. So some of them will mate year round. Some will mate only specifically when those bees are active. So like I said, if their host plants are out, or their flowering plants, right? Their nectar sources are in early spring, then that's when those bees are going to have those mating flights, right? And they're going to be mating at that time and reproducing, right? Yes?
Between bees and wasps.
There is a very small difference, and it's a piece of their waist. And it's just, they're very closely related. I don't know too much about wasps, to be honest. But I know it's just a little piece of their body that's different there in their waist. They're also, wasps tend to be more predatory. So they feed mostly on other insects. And some do feed on nectar, but bees specifically feed on nectar. Right? Yes.
Silly question, what do you think of the bee movie?
I've never seen it. Yeah. Nope. Yeah. No.
Are there other species of bees other than the bombas that you think are more in need of like some conservation attention?
I would say yes. There are some that are very specific to just a small group of cacti, like peyote, for example. There's a Macroptera bee. It's a big-headed, little bee that you don't really see it much. And considering the fact that the plant is also, kind of getting poached all the time, that bee does as well, right? So it's mostly the specialists, right? And you can definitely go and start looking at some of the perdidas as well are also not doing well. But the ones that typically get attention are the bombas, and pretty much bombas, those bumblebees throughout the United States, pretty much all of them are in peril. So it's one of those groups that we're really watching out for. But here in the Rio Grande Valley, we only have the American bumblebee. And one last thing I wanted to mention, this is a good book. If anyone is interested in bees and just kind of helping them out, it's Bees in Your Backyard. It has them by families, and it has all sorts of interesting facts about them. Really nice pictures as well. So it's a good one to go by if you want to learn more about them. Oh. All right. And special thanks to Paula Sharp and Ross Eatman. And then John helped me with that chart with the numbers. And here's my contact info if anyone, wants to reach me for whatever reason.